Welcome to Vendée Radio, and today I am joined by Mr. Jason Craig. It's a great honour to have Mr. Craig with me today. He is the editor of Those Catholic Men and Sword&Spade magazine, of which I'm a subscriber, and the author of Leaving Boyhood Behind, published in 2019. He's also co-founder of Fraternus for Catholic men. He has a master's in theology from the Augustine Institute. Mr. Craig runs a small grade A dairy in South Carolina with his family and hosts retreats and workshops for men there under the title of St. Joseph's Farm. He also writes for The Catholic Gentleman, and he is known to claim that his family invented bourbon. So, Mr. Craig, welcome to Vendée Radio.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, I had good engagement with my interview with Dr. Gerard Stout, and since then I've been reading more deeply the literature around Catholic culture, and particularly the various disciples of Dr. John Senior, and I've become very interested in the Catholic land movement, which actually originated on this side of the pond with Father Vincent McNabb and the distributists, but seems to have acquired a certain degree of purchase in America as well. Now, as a man that's chosen a path of agrarianism, could you give us a little sketch of your life and how you ended up becoming a dairy farmer and the mission you have towards cultivating Catholic culture and particularly supporting Catholic men in doing so?
Sure. The agrarianism for me, it definitely, one, let me just qualify things. That was a long list of things that I do, the dairy farm being one of them. It is not, I don't make most of my income that I need to support my family from a farm. However, we do have a comparatively, relatively land-based home economy, and we do grow a lot of our own food. We're basically sustainable with, as like I say, meat and drink, milk and a lot of pork. We raise a lot of pork. And so just qualify that to make sure people don't think that I was able to transition easily from, a suburban life to now a farmer in, 5 easy steps, because it's massively difficult. When I went to find mentors to dairy farm, and I don't know why we wanted to do that, particularly, it's somewhat intuitive. I do like it, but I got zero encouragement from any dairy farmers to get into it. And they all say basically you can't. it's too insurmountable. The cost of land, the cost of all the equipment, it's not possible. If you haven't inherited it, then you can't do it. That was so I could speak later of how we actually do our dairy farm, and it's in total disarray and a mess right now, and COVID has hurt us tremendously. But the going to the farm was related to the work with Fraternus, the studying at the Augustine Institute, and reading John Sr. And the Distributists and the Vincent McNabb, Chesterton, Belloc. All of these things were swirling in my mind. I think every man at some point in their life has an agrarian bug that bites them. If they're a husband particularly, they realize this would all, they sort of hit a wall where they're maybe in their cubicle or they're at home stuck inside watching Netflix with their family, and they think this whole thing would be easier if I was on a farm. And I think part of the reason we think that is because it's partly true. But we all sort of get bitten by this bug. So I got bit, and we slowly did find our way back. It was largely related to the work with Fraternus, which is proposing very simple things like men should mentor boys in the faith, and that males are more suited to teach and catechize young men because, in fact, they are men, that male and female, he created them, and that our struggles, even our sins, the virtues we need, the vices we get gripped in, they have the broad universal things like prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, yet how that looks in a man's life versus a woman is different. Therefore, men are better at it, mentoring boys, that is, into being men. However, I was wondering what exactly happened. Why is this so difficult? Why does this apostolate even exist? This seems so natural, and slowly going back to just the Industrial Revolution's effect on the family. People just dismiss that discussion a lot, but it's not a romanticized or simplistic proposal to say the Industrial Revolution completely upended the family economy. It's a fact. This is historical fact. And some people will dismiss it. It's like, well, we live completely in an industrialized society, therefore, shut your brain off or something. I don't know. But no, this is the discussion, is how do we now exist in this, technopoly, as Neil Postman put it, that we live in. So that our thought was, let's go back home to North Carolina. We were studying I was in Denver, I was at the Augustine Institute. It's like, let's go home. And we went back to our home state, and we had no money. We bartered to live on our first homestead. We saved enough to be able to buy. So we bartered, meaning I worked on this land in exchange for living in this house that they had on the land. And that's where we experimented with dairy cows and goats and pigs and turkeys and chickens and other terrible animals. It was mostly good. But then we settled into the dairy farming. We actually bought a 3-acre homestead, which Chesterton, the Distributists, famously, the 3 acres and a cow. We did that. We had 3 acres and a cow. And in the last couple years, we moved to a bigger farm. We're about at 20 acres now. And that is only possible because we bought the farm with my father. And now we are running a small grade A. I think we might be the smallest grade A dairy in North Carolina. But yes, this side of the pond, as they say, the distributist ideals really never died, especially in I don't know how we're depicted by your media, but in the South, in the United States, things like kin, tradition, place, limits, the value of personal property, and all of those things remained important. In fact, GK, there was a book by what's called the Southern Agrarians called "I'll Take My Stand." G.K. Chesterton actually reviewed the book, and he said, all along we were trying to revive. I believe this is I don't know the quote exactly, but we were trying to revive Merry England, and it turns out it was over there the whole time, meaning in the South. Obviously, tainted by the horrible sin of chattel slavery. The great thing about being Southern, though, in the United States is that we lost the war among the states, and so we actually had to reconcile with being an enslaving people, whereas the rest of the country also had racism, yet they get to impose on the South all of their sins, even though when I lived in the North for a brief time, when I was a child, it was wildly segregated up there. And when I moved to the South, it was an integrated, diverse community that I lived in. So don't believe everything you're reading. I don't know how it's depicted over there. But anyway, Southern agrarianism in the United States generally has been a long intellectual tradition, but it's not an easily widespread movement. I wouldn't call it that at this point. But anyway, hope that wasn't a long-winded answer to your question. Or did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to pick up on a couple of your points there, Mr. Craig. To start with, we have in the book of Genesis the first commandment that God gives to Adam before the fall is to tend the garden. And in the Last Supper discourse in John 15, our Lord says that where he famously describes himself as the vine and his followers as the branches, that pater meus agricola est, my father is a farmer. In 1946, Pope Pius XII gave an address at the convention of the National Confederation of Italian Farm Owners, and he said, quote, sin did in truth render labour in the fields burdensome, but it was not sin that introduced such labour into the world. Before there was any sin, God gave man the earth for his cultivation as the most beautiful and honourable occupation in the natural order. And he went on to elaborate that it is actual contact, since your lives are lived in places still remote from the excesses of an artificial civilization. Under the Son of the Heavenly Father, your lives are dedicated to bringing forth from the depths of the earth the abundant riches which his hand has hidden there for you. Your contact with Mother Earth has also a deep social significance, because your families are not merely consumer communities, but also and especially producer communities. Your being so strongly rooted in the family constitutes the importance of your contribution to the correct development of the private and public order of society. You are called upon for this reason to perform an indispensable function as source and defence of a stainless moral and religious life. For the land is a kind of nursery which supplies men sound in soul and body for all occupations, for the church and for the state. So that's one of Pius XII's allocutions, and just one of many moments of church teaching that speak to the fact that the church recognizes an organic society, which is very far from what we have now. But I suppose, could you elaborate on how the most basic needs of man for sustenance, for food, shelter, water, the need for farming, is the basis of culture and low culture? And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, as of being foundational to human civilization.
Yeah, there's no, I don't mind the phrase low culture. There's a great book, if anyone's interested. I think it's probably the last book that will be published by Wendell Berry, who's in America. He's interesting. He sort of transcends different political characterizations, but he's a Southern agrarian writer. That's what he is. It's where he is, what he's come from. But he has a great book called On the Art of Loading Brush. And it's a collection of different types of writings, actually. But the last essay I'm sorry, it's not an essay. It's like a missing chapter of a book. And he has a man mentoring a boy in how to load brush. And the boy is a student of classical music. And he says, he snaps at him and he says, you can't even load brush. How do you expect there to be a high culture if there's no low culture? And he said, you go back and tell your professors that. And he's absolutely right. There's all these people that have, articulating or trying to discuss these things. They might say, well, we're no longer an agrarian society. It's like, well, therefore, we're not a true society. It's impossible, because these low things are the necessary things first, because you have a body. I mean, we're delusional to think we've transcended the needs of the body. We just don't see how those needs are easily met. And then sometimes we're greatly dismayed at our lack of health or our lack of security when it comes to food, when all of a sudden our systems and Babel-like food systems don't work as well, which generally they do work very well, but not at making us well. I mean, they're not healthy or better tasting foods. In America, you can get a tomato any time of the year. The only problem is it tastes awful, right? But we don't even care. It's a tomato, right? We got it.
Are you saying a 3D printed chicken nugget isn't isn't sustaining for.
Yeah, and the great thing about things of low culture is that they're enjoyable and they're natural, and because the natural order is created by God, they're good, and they do good things to us. It is good when you work. It is good when you work. It's better when you work with your family. It's better when you work with your family, even better when you're providing your own basic needs and you're secure in those things. I mean, what is all life, all economic activity, we're seeking a certain security, right? Now, dangerous to talk about this in the COVID era because that's like becomes everything. But what I mean is, it's good to know where my next meal will come from. It's better to know where next year's meal will come from. And when you're on the farm, you have a certain awareness of where that's coming from. And the actual doing of that work has the natural consequence, side effect of strengthening the bonds with your family. So it's native and this isn't an idea. That's the thing. It's not an ideal. And that's the problem with agrarianism, because it gets proposed as an ideal. When it's not, it's actually a fact that no, this is the normal state of man that from forever has been normal, organic, natural. It wasn't as if people like me, some living in an apartment going to grad school made a decision to go live back on the land. Isn't he cool? No, this was normal and natural, and we've robbed people of that by displacing them from the land. And that's an important point of Wendell too, is that we've displaced people from the land by policy. It wasn't an organic development that everyone, and that's a myth that people fled to the cities to just bang down the doors of the factories to get inside, to see what what magic incense was being burned in there. It's not true. There was economic and legal activity that was displacing them from their places, their land, and yeah, there was some security with the wage system, but that did not produce, some budding of new wonderful culture that is way better than what we had. Because we're all clamoring back to the village. That's what everyone wants. That's why we name our suburbs villages. But yeah, as Pius XII says, this is the primordial vocation of man. For us men, as you asked, this was our work before we even had a wife, right? It was husbandry before even husband. That was our job. We had a body and it needed to eat, and the way God ordained the world in its perfection was that we would work it. So, and in that though, it's a humble act. God already created the world good, yet he told us to work in it. So what that means is we're bringing to a greater perfection something which is already perfect. That's part of our sharing in his life, which is as creator, as God. We get to share in that life by our work. Right? It was already good. We're just working within. That's very different from modern, factories in the field agriculture. But we are cooperating with the created world in a way that God ordained, that is teaching us something about him. Right? Every contact with something he made is going to teach us about him. And it's also teaching us about ourselves. It's tempering it's increasing our strength. And yes, there is nothing. I love working on the farm where the difference between men and women, physically, even in the way we think and act, becomes manifest and not adversarial. My wife and I have no need to compete over who is better at using the saw to cut something. I am. My upper body strength is stronger. I am better suited to that. And there's nothing adversarial about coming to terms with, I'm going to go get the firewood. Of course she can help, but there's much better ways where she is more helpful and I'm less helpful. And there's nothing, we're not at odds. We're not competing with that labor has been divided in some sort of natural and absolutely equal sense, and we're just slicing up the pie of the labor on the farm. There's things that we're suited to as men and women that are better, that we are better, that I as a man am better than my wife because she's a woman. That's beautiful here. There's nothing scary to our egos living there. So yeah, it is. And when it comes to your question of masculinity, I know there are other means to form boys into men, but I don't know them, meaning I don't know them with firsthand sense knowledge. I do know that the work of physical labor, of using your body helps to form the virtue of young men in ways that no amount of study or information transfer will do. They need to come to grips with their own strength and direct it and temper it and increase it in a setting that is given to them by God to help form their character. That's why I love in Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo XIII, when he talks about the forming of personality by working on the land, that a man forms his personality and impresses his personality on the land, where he becomes more of who he is, which makes sense. If Adam was placed in the garden, till and work, that's the command of God, that's our vocation, then we become more of who we are by working in that natural vocation. So it is a wonderful grace and gift to be able to work close to the land. And it's messy and it's terrible. I'm giving you all the romantic stuff. My sons and I had a terrible week with the cows getting in the barn and completely emptying their entire intestinal tract into places where they should not have, and us having to clean up and deal with that. It's terrible. But at the same time, I don't have to manufacture. I don't need to give them lectures about being responsible. They see the poop on the floor. They clean it up because it must be done. We don't have to have a sit-down family meeting about doing what needs to be done. It needs to be done. It's right there. Go clean the crap up. It's wonderful, and it fills up for a lot of my own shortcomings as a father, that I don't know another means that I would be able to, I don't know, pull these lessons out of flashcards or long drives to school or something. I don't know where else that would happen. Not saying there isn't a way. I'm just saying I don't know those ways, and that is confirmed, one, by people's experience on the farm, and the fact that our society is so lacking in character that it's obviously built on the farm. In that same address, I believe it's that address, Pius XII says the farm produces altogether different men, and that seems to be true. Excuse me. Don't worry, I'm coughing here in isolation. No one's in the room with me.
Homestead isolation. The low culture then has correct conditions, these natural conditions, flowers, is penetrated by grace and then flowers into beautiful high culture over time. So I recall going to Bavaria in southern Germany, which was a landscape until the 18th century dominated by the Klosters, which were the monasteries, and through the just monastic government and economic order, what that created was such an agricultural surplus and time that the artists of the late Baroque, of the Rococo, came from incredibly humble backgrounds, and they adorned this bucolic landscape with the church on the hill, with the Calvary by the road, with the cross on the mountain, turning matter into praise. And so you have this inner transformation from an organic society that can then flower into something beautiful. And today we don't see beauty being produced in our culture because those conditions of the organic culture is not there anymore. So we only produce that which is ugly by and large, with some notable exceptions. So I guess my question is, and this is something I've discussed on this channel before, is how grace perfects nature, and
That's
the problem
a great way
with
to put it.
modern man is denatured, so that leaves people, let's say, kind of unreceptive to grace in this postmodern world we live in. So how do the rhythms of the seasons, the life amongst nature of agriculture predispose one towards the reception of grace?
Yeah, well, it seems as just a matter of fact, and something you particularly can see in Europe is just look, behold, the cultures and the beauty and the art and the architecture and the liturgy and the music and the food and the dance. All of that obviously came from the land itself. I mean, I love the idea even that the word for what we put into milk to make cheese is culture, and those particular cultures, particular to certain places, what else does culture come from if it doesn't begin the simple fact I need a meal? Okay, now that I have that meal, I would like to eat it at a table. Now that I have a table, I'd like to eat it with people. And now, it's getting a little dark. Let's light a candle. Well, why don't we adorn what's around the candle? Well, why don't we have more why don't we pray before? Why don't we pray after? Why don't we read after? All of these things are growing from the meal, which grows from the basic human need of the body. I mean, this is where it has to begin in the low culture. It can't begin anywhere else, and it begins in a particular place, not as because what you're describing is the modern, and this is the reason they impose their idealism on agrarianism is no, let's come up with the idea, and we'll make it, and then we'll demand the logic of it be accepted. I think there's actually something telling in the etymology of technologies, the Greek words techne, logos, techne, like kind of like technique, like let's make it, logos being wisdom, like let's make it, and then we'll figure out the wisdom later. Whereas I think those cultures you're describing, as they are secure in things like their food, I know where there's a pig in the yard, I know where my meal will come from next month. We have time for what, true leisure and we see and we're recognizing in our intimacy with the land that what beauty is, let's manifest that more and more. That's again, like with Adam, the till and keep the garden is not to do something opposed to it, is to bring what's already good into a greater and greater perfection. I mean, that's what a true culture, especially one perfected and corrected and tempered by grace in the teachings of the church, are able to flourish, and where people are happy when they flourish. Of course, accepting our old friend sin and how he comes and ruins all sorts of parties, that is always growing out of low culture. So for us and our family, we pursue a particularly low culture, and we're not that great at it. We're trying to bring greater order and peace to our farm, but as we say off with the children, we have to bring order to what we're doing first before we can go off and really build on that. But we are growing. We see the culture growing from the rhythms of this land and the needs that come with it. So yes, when it comes to the purpose of our buildings, what they're made of, the liturgy, the rhythms of prayer, just being in contact with the world around us puts those things not in conflict, but in sort of a synthesis and integration. And you said you said grace perfects nature. Some people, that's a Thomistic phrase, and some people will put it, grace builds on nature. And I think, especially for us Americans that love to build stuff on whatever, wherever we want. Of course, the Benedictines in England, I mean, they drained the swamps, right? I guess that's all they had, but they like to change land too. Just took them longer. People, when they hear grace builds on nature, they still sense a certain opposition. But grace,
I think it's a helpful phrase,
yeah,
because grace infuses nature and transforms it. It's not like it plops on top.
right. And now we can get started, right? Oh, now that we have grace, we'll just leave nature behind. And it's like, no, it's perfect. It's bringing because God created it good, and now he's bringing it to a greater perfection through grace, correcting the distortions and disfigurement of sin. That's a wonderful thing. So I love to know, and to, I have, our last home was a 100-year-old farmhouse that was still built upon giant stones. I crawled under the house and found where it was still propped up on rocks. And I actually found a 7-foot 2-man saw in the garden that was buried under soil. And to just think of how integrated this place was, but it was also beautiful. They had painted it, they had given thought to the structure of it. It wasn't just useful; it was also beautiful. And it was very moving to me to find that saw and think that they must have felled trees for either the building or the warmth of that very home that I'm in now. And that work itself would have drawn them together, and the purpose of their work was obviously oriented towards that home right there. and how different that is for so many of us men that seek the balancing of life with work and family. And, you can only picture a scale, you can only bring things in balance that are separated. The reason we speak of balance is because they're separated. We really are, our work and everything that happens is really in a sort of competition and we as husbands and fathers are often in the middle, torn by those demands. And part of our hopes with our farm is to bring those things in an integration. I don't want a balanced life. I want an integrated life. And it's it's a very difficult project. I'll put it that. I always want to make sure I qualify this so this doesn't sound overly romanticized.
Well, it's work constantly.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The modern world militates against that.
Yeah.
As the atmosphere that we're working in.
Well, also, there's a sort of the idol of choice itself, that my life is a big choice, that I have to make the right ones, the good ones, the most profitable ones, the right ones, the polite ones, and that my human agency is almost absolute. Whereas here, we're limited. I can't even leave the house tonight easily because I have cows to milk. I have children running around everywhere. We have 7 children. They just pop out of everywhere. And I'm amazingly limited. I have very few choices on how I can spend the rest of my day. But in that, I find the freedom, right, to be fully human and giving myself away in this work and all those things. But yeah, as you mentioned, society puts those things apart, but it also puts them before you and says, choose. What are you going to choose? Choose your career, choose your family, choose this. This pro-choice is the, which of course is, in the most heinous image of that is you can even choose to not be limited by the life of the child in the womb. If you should so choose to get rid of that thing, you even have that. I mean, it's just choice is now absolute. Excuse me.
Yeah, in the name of freedom, freedom to sin, which enslaves us. Right. Just to go back to Catholic culture, it presupposes, at least for the celebration of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, the ability to produce wine and bread. So at least that minimal level.
No. Back up. No, back up. You're getting ahead of yourself. First, you have to produce the wheat and the grapes. Even the preparation of making them appropriate is an act of human culture before they ever get there.
Yes, it's a hunter-gatherer society cannot have the Mass.
That's a good observation. That's right.
Yeah. So, and this is Roger Scruton writes beautifully about this, even though he wasn't a Catholic, but how the wines of Bordeaux were destined not to just be a beverage, but a sacrament. And Martin Moserbach talks about this as well, how nature gives liturgy to God, and how there is a song of praise in nature for the bees whose wax will go to produce votive candles, and the grapes that will be transubstantiated into the very precious blood of our Lord. So there's an integratio there. How is Catholic culture genitum non factum, begotten, not made?
Right. Well, this is a little. I think you read where I've written that somewhere. I use that phrase a lot: begotten, not made, especially. Excuse me. With.
I can meditate on it for days, months.
Well, I can't escape the phrase now because I really think we are. I mean, when it comes to, again, back to this choice thing, the idea of family and place, these are all things that you inherit. They're all gifts. They're not achievements. They're not accolades. You didn't earn them. They're born, right? You're born and to be able to respond rightly to a gift with good stewardship and gratitude is a totally different disposition than look what I can make. It is just it's the Tower of Babel versus the Garden of Eden. I mean, they're just totally different dispositions. And I don't think even we realize how often we refuse what is given. We refuse the gift of nature, of grace, of kin, of family, and we really only value that which we make happen. And I know my culture more intimately. That's a particular for Americans, is that our confidence in being able to build ourselves out of any problem has been practically helpful in lots of ways, but it's partly delusional in other ways.
They overwhelm them.
What's that?
Americans don't solve problems, they overwhelm them. That's
right. Yes, indeed. So I actually, in even our shared friend Jared Stout, I believe you mentioned Jimmy Mitchell. One of the things I don't like is, if you look today at like lots of Catholic websites, how many of them say something like building Catholic culture, or rebuilding culture, or rebuilding Christendom, or building back Christendom better, or make Christendom great again. There's this great confidence in human agency that I understand. We can't just sit around and do nothing and talk on your radio show all day. But at the same time, it is begotten, not made. We have to submit to these things as if they were true, because they are. And there's an organic growth that we have to submit to, and realize that we cannot right this ship quickly, easily, programmatically, systematically. As Wendell Berry says, the modern man thinks the simple formula of science plus political will equals the solution. We have to, again, what I think we're actually proposing in some of these ideals, especially agrarian and specifically Catholic agrarianism, is not a submission to an idea, but to reality itself, in that we are going to relinquish a little bit of control, and in doing that find freedom in responding to the truth as we perceive it, which is what you mentioned the artist earlier, who had the leisure and the ability, because they're secure, to look at the world as it is, and their response is to try to reflect the beauty of it in their art and in their culture and in their person. And that is just it's subtle. I know it sounds esoteric, but it's not. It's eminently practical as well. That's a totally different disposition to go against the world, thinking I don't have to conquer it. I mean, I was struck recently by just the beatitude of blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Inherit is a gift. The earth is a place. I never even thought about how tangible that is. I don't know how exactly that's going to work out. I think of most of the Beatitudes as beatific vision. But the meek, it really seems as if the strong have conquered the earth. To think that the meek are actually the ones that will inherit it. It'll be given as a gift, not as a conquest. Is just this entire disposition is different. I think it's actually the disposition of faith and the disposition of believing that truth is truth, and that one ought to discover and submit to it as soon as possible, and in all ways possible.
Yeah, one of the paradoxes Chesterton mentions, I think, that the more one is bound to the responsibilities, the duties of matrimony, to family, to place, to community, to nation, the more one is free. The world has the opposite understanding, of course.
Yeah, which the hilarious thing that happens on my farm a lot. I am a man who works from home, who has a dairy farm. I have 7 children. I am so lacking in freedom. It's amazing you and I are even doing this right now. I am totally encumbered. And you know who comes to the farm all the time? Successful, unlimited, free, wealthy at a young age, young men, unmarried men. They come here looking for direction. And I think to myself, why have you come here? I mean, aren't you the ideal of what? And they are. I mean, they epitomize what they've been sold as. I mean, they're Jeffrey Epstein, man, except without getting caught. They're doing it, and because let's the whole Epstein things. Let's not pretend that we don't propose this as an ideal and then punish people
Sure.
when they reach it. The hypersexualization of everything. Sorry, make sure I qualify my comment there. But these young men have it all, and they come here asking me for something. I tell, I've got nothing for you. You get married and find a place and stop. I don't. This isn't a complicated form. I'm sorry, I don't have the list of best practices for how to be human, but I'm pretty sure it means bind yourself to things that you love and you are bound to, and they are bound to you. That might be a good start. But yeah, it's quite a paradox. What are you doing here on a dairy farm?
You're right that we have this rationalistic perception of the universe that comes to us as from the Enlightenment, the Endarkenment, and we perceive the world as will have outcomes. And you see this in church as much as anywhere else, and how in diocesan catechesis, for example, there's an attitude of if we just get the right
Yeah.
catechetical program, we'll get it right. Rather than saying, okay, how about we just tell every Catholic family in the diocese, have one meal a day where you say grace and you eat together, not in front of the television, and you pray one decade of the rosary. Just start really, really simple, and then next year make it 2 decades.
Next year.
Allow that to cultivate very slowly, but we don't have that trust, that faith in nature to be able to say that.
Nature or grace. Take confirmation, the preparations for confirmation. People, I don't know if it's the same there, but here, the general disposition, even if it's sometimes spoken against, is this is when you make a public proclamation of your faith, you make it your own, yada, yada, yada. Which, by the way, in the Council of Trent said if anyone says that confirmation is for the public proclamation of the faith of adolescents, let them be anathema. But when we speak of confirmation, we don't speak as if it's something will actually happen, meaning grace will be given to a soul and there'll be, you can receive confirmation at 7, but we delay it. We delay it to 14, 15, 16. We pile on requirements, community service. There's just if we just say something, they'll get it finally. Whereas if you look at the canon law of confirmation, there's 3 people that see to the suitability of a child being confirmed: their parents, their sponsor, and the pastor. My son is behind the screen. You can't see this. He's come to interrupt me and show me that he made a crossbow. He made a crossbow and he's firing it, and it actually works. Maybe we should. I wish this radio was if it was a video, I would show your listeners. Anyway, when it comes to confirmation, in the time of the Council of Trent, you needed to know basically the Our Father and the Creed to get confirmed. Yet there could be a comfort in knowing that you're imbued with an entire Catholic culture all around you. But we we constantly just pile on more requirements, more tests, more lists to memorize. And this is conservative and liberal circles. They don't know what to do with sacramental prep. And the simple thing is to live the faith in the home. I've proposed that pastors, if they have the data to show very clearly that they've lost, maybe a generation or 2 of children through their sacramental prep programs, that they should let their people go that are in charge of those things politely, if they're probably sincere, and then inform all the fathers that they are now completely in charge of instruction in the faith, and pass out and say, well, now that I have much smaller staff, I'll be meeting with each family on the phone if we need to, of course, COVID, and to make sure that you can explain to me your approach as a father to leading your family in virtue and understanding the faith, and I'll call you in about 3 months, see how that's going. Imagine the transformation that would happen. I mean, how quickly it would occur if the parents are actually responsible, which they are. They will be judged for their children's formation, right? They're the ones being judged. They have vocation to it, not the catechetical industrial complex, that argues endlessly over curriculum and how many hours to sit these poor children in a classroom as if that's what they need more of. I'm not opposed to classrooms, but most of
Yeah,
them.
our Lord blessed children and taught, catechized adults, and we catechize children and bless adults. As you say, it's the lack of. But what would again militate against that is, at least within the Novus Ordo system, they do not accept the headship of the father.
Right. Yeah, they actively.
By
Yeah,
so given mutual submission, then that makes that very, very difficult.
Yeah, that's I've actually been, especially during the time of COVID, I've been asserting my fatherly authority as much as possible, because there are bishops who have forbidden people to come to my farm and camp, and I have been told if they can cancel masses, and we're in a time of emergency, canon law makes it clear, then stop withholding graces from my children and confirm them. But our diocese and the catechetical industrial complex has all sorts of rules and guidelines that have nothing to do with theology or law. And I'm asserting, no, I have jurisdiction here. I would like my child confirmed. And there's not an argument. It's there. So my kids will be confirmed this weekend, by the way. So if you're wondering, we like to confirm our children at young ages. But that's we should do a whole nother show on that. It would be great. But I think that's actually a place where fathers can demand, no, I would like you to allow me to be faithful to my vocation by letting me teach my children. If you want to assess them, we can talk about how that can look. But actually, for our confirmation, they said, well, they need to come in for a test. And I said, no, I'll administer the test at home, and I'll let you know. And I didn't ask them. I just said, no, I'll administer the test. And I'll, because I care more than you, because I'm their father. I'm sure you're very sincere. I'm sure you care, but you don't care more than me. So, no, I want to make sure that they take the tests. And
well, he is a father, but the problem is he doesn't think like a father. In a lot of cases, they think of it as administrators or managers.
Right.
And this is the problem with the homosexual inclination, is that it militates against fatherliness because they have a father wound. So that's a whole nother kettle of fish to get into. But you wrote a wonderful article called "In Defense of Gentlemanly Things." Interest amongst young men. You see it in websites, programs such as The Art of Manliness, and all this kind of interest on the internet amongst these grassroots in kind of vintage manly customs and fashion and practices and traditions. And you said that, quote, I don't think young men dressing, acting and drinking with a vintage flair are longing for vintage for fashion's sake, but I think deep down are looking for the universals of manliness that our culture is failing to give. Brotherhood, fatherhood, even friendship. So it's this Platonic idea. They're after a lost we. A boy watching a video on shaving with a straight razor is not longing to shave like his granddad, but is longing for his granddad. I don't know who we are, he says, but I think this is how we used to do it. He knows something went awry, and that for some reason he is alone, an individual. This thing, this razor, is a link that he knows he needs to. End quote. I thought that was quite profound and really speaks to the utter decay of the social fabric that we see, and that obviously the breakdown of the family, what kind of loneliness and atomization this has led to. You go on to talk about how modern customs are lame. And what could you expand on that? How the desire for the real, for the tangible, for the natural will always sort of supersede the desire for the latest Apple gadget.
Yeah, well, there is, as I think I wrote that article probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I would say that whatever problems were being perceived then are getting worse, because the atomization of society, where we're even individual from each other, is getting extremely intensified, especially in COVID. I'll give you an example. We just finished building a house on our farm. We host retreats on the farm. But we had actually hosted on another farm. We rented that place, and it burned down by a lightning strike. I know God works in all ways and holds the whole world in being, but there's something about a lightning strike that makes you think he's up to something. So we discerned that we were going to build a house. So we built a house. And when I say built it, I mean we did a lot of the actual labor. And by the way, asserting fatherly authority in America, it's you still have the legal right to build your own home, but it's buried under bureaucratic systems. So when I went in to get all my permits, they said, "What's the license number of your electrical contractor?" I said, "I will be doing it." They said, "No, you need a contractor." Nope, I don't. I will be doing it. It's my home. So little assertion of authority there again. It was a blast. But I was amazed. I have a father. He's great and terrible and lost in many ways, but he's worked in construction his whole life, and our bond was strengthened immensely because I refused to look up on YouTube how to do anything, and it strengthened our relationship as father and son because I needed him to be able to complete the work. Had I bypassed him, I probably could have figured out how to run a circuit and wire a three-way switch via YouTube, but I watched 0 videos, and I think that's somewhat by habit and disposition, but also trying to not allow the technological solution to be the answer to all my problems, but looking for the human in the natural solution, which is often, the byproduct, like we were saying at the very beginning of this, of the natural solution is that it's also good, and doesn't leave you drained and watching, 90s rap videos on YouTube when you went to go figure out how to wire a switch. Not that ever happened to me. So when, like I said, those young men, they're going to YouTube to learn how to, in the internet, and I was amazed when the phenomenon of the art of manliness and similar things came in, how many men, especially young men, jumped on the idea of wearing a necktie or a bow tie or sharpening a knife. Or the longing in men's hearts for the practical and tangible is amazing, and we cannot dislodge it from the reality that we learn these things from persons, from people, and the work itself and the act itself of learning to tie a tie, although my father is terrible at tying a tie, I'm much better. I will teach my sons better than he taught me. That's the play. Just the other night, my son is he's an altar server, and he's learning he needs to keep his shoes shined, and I taught him how to shine a shoe. And it was, it's like, man, this is straight out of the internet, except it's not. This is normal human activity. And we live a life where I don't take a picture and put it on the internet, everything I'm doing to validate that it's important. We don't do, my children, if you were doing any research on my articles, you didn't find their picture. That's on purpose. It's not there. Anyway, again, that's another topic. But these things that we do, when we say, like, let's be great dads again and be good fathers and reassert for men, you know what that means is, what do you want me to do exactly? Does this mean some sort of special talk I need to have? No, don't be weird. Don't, for God's sake and your children's sake, don't stuff everybody in a small group and talk until you've got all your problems figured out. Go split firewood. Teach him how to get dressed. Inform him where his natural waist is. Show him how to tie a tie. Show him how, my sons they're learning. These things are simple. And again, I think we're actually blending, you bringing up that article, is high culture and low culture, that once we have a certain civilization of our place, then the obviously your listeners don't have the camera, but I seem to have lost my razor. The beard I'm going to have to start shaving just to teach my sons to. But these things are all related. So you men out there that might be listening that are not anywhere close to the land, you still have bodies. I mean, you exist in a world, a physical, material world. And that is the means of connection for humanity. That's how we connect, which is why I'm horrified and all of us being isolated at home and using the word connection in sites that aren't sites, in places that aren't places, and feeds that don't feed you, and all of these imitations of real things are doing us great harm because they are media. There's something in between us and the thing itself. So yes, I stand by that article still. It's written long ago, but it's worse now. And I think when you see these young chaps and perhaps they're a little too dandy, a little excessive, maybe that's what happens when you learn how to get dressed from the internet. Be a little more subdued and classic if you have some men in your life. Maybe, depending on your place and the style. But yes, that's the difference between style and fashion. Style comes to you as a gift from people who've put clothes on longer than you. Fashion comes from other people coming up with new ideas, and fashion is a tyranny. Style is a custom, is wisdom. Fashion is unmanly and draining of masculinity, and it absorbs your mind. You know, the dandy was only made possible after the rise of industrialization. Dandyism is an interesting topic to follow because men simply didn't have the time or the inclination or the excessive mirror standing time to of course, I'm talking about the modern dandy. There's always been men that look at the images of kings and things, but the point is, sorry, getting off track there. Yes, you still have a body even if you're not close to the land, and whether you're splitting wood or learning to paint your own home or moving around furniture or hanging a picture, involve your children. And as you said, when you get done, pray your rosary. Just a decade. Next year you can pray too. That's great advice, by the way.
Thank you very much. And for those listeners who may be thinking, well, I'm in a knowledge economy job, which seems to maybe fall into what John Senior called the parasitic work from the point of view of economic health. Thoreau said that in the most men lead lives of quiet desperation. The work they do is so distant from reality and doesn't seem to contribute to the common good. It's part of the bureaucratic state, which is orchestrated by the oligarchs, the powerful private interests, manipulation of labor, supplies, markets. The sin of usury is very much at the heart of it.
All things inorganic. That's your list there. Notice that is imposed. That John Senior also defines the tyrant as he who imposes from without, right? Opposed to the father who has affection and leads and guides from within. The family. That's the difference.
And they may feel this impulse to return to the land. As you say, it's kind of an instinct that maybe lies dormant within every man. And that impulse may be growing more urgent in this time of the so-called Great Reset, perhaps approaching, and clearly some kind of switch is being flipped from factory farming to almost lab food production, using the pretext of COVID and the so-called environmental crisis, the pretext of sustainability. The enemies of God are using this time to switch to a 3D printed meat and cockroach nuggets and all sorts of delicacies coming your way.
As nauseating as it sounds, is it not inevitably, by the logic of things, even the modern agricultural practices that, farmers had a great word that they used for farming that's harsh on the land. They call it rape. The earth is a mother, and this is a rape of what you're doing. Yes, there's a certain violence to certain times of agriculture, but now in people's minds they've set man as opposed to the earth he walks on, as if we're now an adversarial. Which, of course, in some ways, we're causing harm. That doesn't mean we do that by nature. We do that when we leave our nature behind. We're not naturally destructive of the things that sustain us. I mean, you have to be some sort of.
Sorry, I say that modernity is a series of revolutions, and we've everything is broken down, dissolved to such a stage now where the very earth is rising up against man for rising up against God.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a truth there that they obviously distort. You have done tremendous work, splendid work with St. Joseph's Farm in pursuing an integrated agricultural life, although even you acknowledge that you're not able to do this full time. The economic system is so rigged against a cottage economy, against subsistence agriculture, that it's economically unviable. So my question is that for men listening to this who may be thinking along these lines, what advice would you give to be able to get started and to return to the land when land is prohibitively expensive, and when they may not have family links to people who can teach them those skills?
Right. Well, I did not either. I had to find those, and I will say the best advice I tell people is to get off of Google to find your solution. That there is land everywhere, and it is largely still fertile, and you can have very simple systems created and understandings between neighbors and people who do have land. Because the biggest obstacle, or there's two, the biggest obstacles is agriculture is a culture, and you can't build a culture. It grows, and you're not an agricultural person.
Begotten, not made.
It's begotten, not made. You cannot make yourself a farmer. I'm wildly offended how often managers of things call me and say, well, what I want to do is use all my my money to buy a farm, and I'll let other people farm it, and I'll manage it. Anyway, so you don't have the culture, you don't know how, but don't despair. Get started. Plant a tomato. Um, Next is, and you need to find mentors and things like in that realm. But and then the other cost prohibitive, or the thing that's prohibitive is the cost of land. Land is artificially inflated because it is no longer valued for its true agricultural purposes, but as essentially a status symbol in a state alone. It's not it's not valued for what it can actually produce, which is sad, because then the people that own it don't have an affection for it, and they do things like, my neighbors who live in Virginia and own 90 acres and logged it all. Who cares? You got the money from the log, and they're not caring for it and planting it back or anything like that. So my point is, just get started. You are in an agrarian society. You are an agrarian creature by nature. If you can support local farms, if you can't grow any food, that's fine. But grow a tomato, barter, just get off the screen and interact with people. Even when I was beginning this, I was living in an apartment in Denver, Colorado. I happened to notice my neighbor across the street had this big old empty lot. I said, can I plant a garden there? He said, yeah. So within 20, 30 feet of my window, I had a garden in the middle of, a city. I don't want to propose too many ideas, because I'm actually astounded at human ingenuity when you sort of just get off of trying to find the solution on your search results, and just step outside. It's amazing how simple even the precepts of the gospel, love your neighbor, is so practical. And agrarianism is not an impractical ideal. It's the most practical thing you can possibly think of, because you need food every day, multiple times a day. So anyway, I would say just figure out how to find a simple connection to it. If you're interested in actually farming, it's just find a mentor, find somewhere to go and start, and just work within the place where you are. It might be impossible for some people. I don't know. But we found a home we could barter with. I found some mentors. Actually, I live on the farm of one of my first mentors. But I can wrap all that up and simply say, you can get started where you are. I'm living on the farm of one of my first mentors, and I just looked him up and asked him to teach me something. He told me to shut up and buy a cow. So I bought a cow. Actually, I bought 2 cows, and we just got started. I mean, just get started. Don't be fearful of failure. There's an article out, and there's a new magazine out called Hearth and Field, sort of an agrarian Catholic magazine, that I have an article in about some tips when you're getting started. But if you're interested in the the value of agrarianism, and you can't actually be a farmer. That's also fine too. Chesterton was not a farmer. He just wrote about us a lot. And that's fine. There's very good ways that you can support and secede, or support the good and secede from the bad. And you just need to figure out what that is for where you live.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that all work need be manual. The intellectual tradition of the church is that intellectual work is higher than manual work, in that the intellect is higher than the body. The architecture is a more noble occupation than carpentry, not to, again, denigrate carpentry or anything else, but that the glazier, the mason, and understand not just how those crafts work, but why and how they integrate. I guess the problem comes in when you start talking about, okay, that building firm now has a marketing manager and a database officer. It's that next step removed is problematic.
Right. There's a difference between a higher intellectual work and just work that doesn't use the body anymore. There's some distinctions there, but there's, as John Senior, the parasitic, the people trying to insert or extract profit from normal human interactions that don't need them involved in them. That's where the diabolical is, and those are the places where we can more easily not participate than in some ways than we think.
Yeah, and also just to touch on this dichotomy we sometimes have in our minds. I remember reading in Roberto Di Matteo's biography of Dr. Plinio Correa de Oliveira, he was very keen that he was not labelled as a Catholic intellectual, because that is the result of a Cartesian split between the soul and the body, and it would minimise the Catholic action that he did, his work as a Catholic priest, to just be labeled a Catholic intellectual, as Catholics were meant to live integrated lives of mind and body. So it's been a great honour, Mr. Craig, to have you on Vendée Radio again in the future. But I would like slightly a provocative question, and on a different topic. How are most trads modernists?
Is that something? Are you pulling that from your own thought, or did I write something on?
I heard you say that on a podcast. Okay. Full disclosure. Yeah.
Well, most of them are modernists in their radical individuality. I hope that's what I said in other places you read. Although I might have some other caveats in there. But it's unfortunate right now the way the language within the church is trying to put at some sort of odds the love of tradition and the love of our common humanity. And sometimes both sides entrench themselves in ways that are strangely opposed. And I think trads, which I have attended almost exclusively the Latin Mass for about 12 years. So I'm not throwing rocks inside, or I'm from the outside, I should say, is that our radical need for one another and the love of neighbor and the love of each other gets dismissed as some sort of nonsense of the Francis sort, when it's actually, if we want the culture that we love and we believe is received through tradition to be what it is, then we really need each other. And it was actually a traditionalist priest who, when I first left to go venture to the country to seek the ideals of the Catholic agrarian village, he said the problem that you're going to find is that no one needs each other anymore. That just as the bodily need of food, creates the need for agriculture, us recognizing that we need one another and that this is how we know, this is how we are confirmed and live out the actual faith, is something that's just not spoken about, the mutual love of one another. So anyway, or to sum it all up, you can't baptize yourself. That's how I would put it, a little more short and pithy.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. So, Mr. Craig, thank you very much for your time and your wisdom.
Great job. Thank you. I appreciate this very much.
Thank you. God bless.